Warcry is a game with a fairly in-depth list building system, so much so that one aspect of it is often forgotten about. Welcome to Wargames on Toast, all of you lovely people. It's me, it's Toast. How are you doing today? Between monsters, allies and Bladeborn, it's pretty easy to forget about the humble Thrall. This is for a number of reasons, one of which is that they're just not all that bombastic compared to other options within the list building system, and another is that an entire Grand Alliance doesn't have access to the system at all. But all of that being true, that doesn't mean you should ignore Thralls because they're pretty darn good, and in this video I'm going to go over some of the very best and why. But before we get into all of that, it's time for a little bit of shilling.
I am shocked. Shocked. Well, not that shocked.
Please consider leaving a like, a comment and subscribing, as that helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. And if you want to help in a more tangible way, then please consider signing up to my Patreon or my YouTube members, or using my Element Games affiliate link down below when buying some new Warcry gubbins. A huge shout out to my patrons and members who you can find on screen now. Badoosh. But with all of that out of the way, it's time to get on with the show.
And now for something completely different.
So before we dive into specifics, what even are Thralls? Well, Thralls are creatures and minions and beasts that various Grand Alliances can ally in and bind to their will. They are, in short, domesticated animals. Sometimes. So how do you take Thralls? Well, if you're in a Grand Alliance that can run Thralls, chaos, death or destruction, then you can take up to 3 Thralls in your list, and that's it. You still have to pay your costs, and they do turn off any battle trace because they do not share your individual faction's rune mark, despite sharing the Grand Alliance rune mark. In addition to all of that, Thralls have access to their own reactions and abilities and can make use of universal reactions and abilities, but do not have access to your faction's specific abilities. So with all of that admin out of the way, let's dive into some pretty darn swanky Thralls. We are going to start with the faction with the most Thralls, and these are the Thralls of Chaos, who are naturally used by the Chaos Grand Alliance. Chaos has access to a whopping 5 Thralls, and they are the Fury, the Chaos Warhound, the Raptorix, the Chaos Spawn, and the Razorgore. The price of these models ranges from 85 all the way to 205 based on which Thrall you want, and if I'm being perfectly honest, most of these are worth their points and are pretty darn good. For me though, there are 2 Thralls that stand above all others, one of which is fairly common by Thrall standards, and one of which I think needs more attention. Starting with Old Reliable, we have the Chaos Spawn. This guy is 170 points for movement 5, toughness 4, 30 wounds, and a 4-4-2-4 profile at 1-inch range, and he also has the Beast rune mark. The Chaos Spawn is just undeniably solid. It's decently fast, it's pretty darn good in combat, and 30 wounds is a lot to cut through, and for 170 points, it's not all that expensive. And then you throw in its triple, Writhing Tentacles. Add the value of this ability to the attack's characteristic of the next melee attack action made by this fighter in this activation. So with that ability active, the Chaos Spawn can throw up to 14 attacks out in a single activation, which is not insignificant. Granted, Strength 4 is merely average, so make him Strength 5 for 20 points with Divine Blessings, and then he's a little murder machine with that 2-4 damage profile. One of the downsides and strengths of the Spawn is this thing has the Beast rune mark. This means it can't pick up treasures in addition to other minor inconveniences, but it also means that it can be whipped by various factions to make them attack again, making the Chaos Spawn even more valuable in those factions. But let's be honest, if you've been around Warcry long enough, you've probably encountered the Chaos Spawn. He is, like I said, a fairly common pick as far as Thralls are concerned. What isn't common, however, is my next favourite, which is the Fury. Now, to be fair, the Fury has only recently risen to prominence in my eyes, but now that I've noticed this thing, I can't get enough of it. For 95 points, you get a movement 8, toughness 3, 8 wound model with a 3-3-1-2 profile. So it's awful in combat for its cost, and it's got low toughness, and it's got low wounds. This thing is made of paper, but it is movement 8. Then we have the extra little things that make it really shine. Firstly, the Fury has fly, so it more or less ignores all terrain, and unlike every other Thrall on this list, the Fury, despite looking rather bestial, is not a beast. This means the Fury is ideal in any Chaos Warband as a treasure carrier. You fly up, you pick up that treasure, and then you run away. This thing is fast enough to get into danger and then get out of danger, even if its movement is reduced once it picks up that treasure, and it loses fly once it picks up that treasure. The other use for Furies is just being a pain in the arse. This thing can just fly up the board, contest objectives, tie up range units for a turn, and with a flock of them, even take objectives. Granted, they won't hold it for very long because they are made of paper, but for 95 points, the Fury is a surprisingly versatile model thanks to no beast, fly, and movement 8. And of course, it would be silly of me not to mention the Chaos Thrall reaction, which is actually fantastic. It is called the Master's Voice. A fighter can make this reaction after an enemy fighter finishes a move action within 3 inches of a friendly fighter with a hero rune mark. This fighter makes a bonus move action. Then this fighter makes a bonus attack action. The Master's Voice is incredible. It is fantastic value. You burn 1 action to gain functionally 2 actions, and it's super easy to proc because all you have to do is have your spawn, mainly, near your hero, and that thing's moving 5. So anything that gets within 3 inches will almost surely get within range of the spawn, and the spawn's pretty darn decent in combat. And if they make the mistake of not engaging your hero, then your spawn prevents them from attacking your hero because your spawn has to engage them and then they can't attack outside of engagement range. So you can absolutely trap a clumsy player. So moving on to Thralls of Death, I'll start with their reaction simply because the Thralls of Death have the same reaction as the Thralls of Chaos. It is called Necromantic Bonds, and it's identical. The only difference is that you don't necessarily have a unit that can make fantastic use of this because they don't have access to things like the spawn. But they do have access to 2 fairly interesting thralls in the form of the Direwolf and the Fellbat. Starting with the Direwolf, this thing is movement 8, toughness 3, 10 wounds with a 3-3-1-3 profile for 85 points, and the Direwolf, in my opinion, is almost a must-take in almost any death warbands for 3 reasons, maybe even 4, I can't remember. Firstly, this thing is fast at movement 8. Secondly, this thing is cheap with 85 points. Thirdly, this thing has a fantastic ability called Slavering Charge on a double, which reads, a fighter can only use this ability if there is a visible enemy fighter within 6 inches of them. This fighter makes a bonus move action and must finish closer to the closest visible enemy fighter than they were at the start of that move activation. Slavering Charge may just be a generic charge, but it does give the Direwolf increased mobility, which is fantastic on a model with movement 8 to begin with. But that's not all. The eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed a cunning omission on the Direwolf, and that's that the Direwolf is not a beast. This means the Direwolf is eligible to pick up treasure, and with movement 8 and access to free moves, this thing can get around the board, pick up the treasure, and then skedaddle like nobody's business, and he's only 85 points. I don't play Death often, but when I do play Death, I bring at least 1 Direwolf because these things are just utility manifest. And because they're so cheap and they're so fast, you can just throw them away as impromptu nets or lob them onto objectives to be an absolute pain in the dick. Fellbats are your second option, and these guys are movement 10, toughness 3, and 12 wounds with a 3-3-2-4 profile, but come in at 130 points. Fellbats I like less purely because they're a little bit too expensive for what I want to use them for, which is contesting objectives and objective grabby nonsense. But for the most part, the Fellbat shares nearly all of the strengths of the Direwolf, including its lack of Beast of Runemark, even though it looks like a beast. And of course, +2 movement and fly make this thing incredible at getting around the board. Rounding the Fellbat out is its ability Scent of Gore. It is a triple and it reads, a fighter can use this ability only if there is a visible enemy fighter within 1 inch of them that has 5 or more damage points allocated to them. This fighter makes a bonus attack action. It's fine, it's not great. The Fellbat's not all that good in combat. Strength 3, 3 attacks isn't good enough, and whilst 2-4 damage is fine, this is a okay ability on a model that isn't good enough in combat to make use of it, and it's a triple, so it's a little bit expensive. In Death, you have better use of triples than Scent of Gore, so you likely won't use this very often, if at all. It's certainly not as good as Slavering Charge on the Direwolf, that's for sure. So for me, both of these Thralls are at a bare minimum good, but the Direwolf is absolutely outstanding, and I don't know why we don't see more of it. And finally, we move on to the Thralls of Destruction, which consists of 2 Troggoths, the Fell Water Troggoth and the Rock Gut Troggoth. Starting with the Fell Water Troggoth, we have a movement 4, toughness 4, 28 wound model with a 4525 profile for 175 points. And stat-wise, this thing is pretty darn fine. That strength 5 is wonderful, 28 wounds is wonderful, and 4 attacks is fine, even if 2-5 damage is a little bit underwhelming. Where the Fell Water Troggoth shines is in its unique ability called Noxious Vomit, which is a double, and it reads, roll a number of dice equal to the value of this ability. For each roll of a 5+, pick a visible enemy fighter within 6 inches of this fighter and then allocate D3 damage points to that fighter. Noxious Vomit, despite hitting on a 5+, is pretty darn good because it's cheap to use and it does good damage. And honestly, your opinion on Noxious Vomit and how much you want to use it will really determine whether or not you take the Fell Water or not, because the Rock Gut Troggoth for 10 points more is pretty darn good. This thing is movement 4, toughness 5, 28 wounds, with a 3-5-3-6 profile. So you lose 1 attack, but you gain 1 damage, and you gain 1 crit, and you gain 1 toughness, but you cost 10 points more, but you then also lose Noxious Vomit. What the Rock Gut Troggoth can do, and this is shared with the Fell Water Troggoth too, by the way, is do the Troggoth Regrowth. Remove a number of damage points from this fighter up to the value of this ability, and that's a double. It makes both of these guys incredibly hard to shift, and the Rock Gut himself is pretty darn good in combat, because 3-5-3-6 is good enough to smash through a lot of things in the game. And then finally you round that up with their reaction, and if you were hoping that the Destruction Thralls would get the same reaction as the other 2 Grand Alliances, you'll be sorely disappointed. I know that I was, but horrific stench is what they get, and a fighter can make this reaction after they are targeted by a melee attack action but before the hit rolls are made. Subtract 1 from the attack's characteristic of that attack action to a minimum of 1. This is fine, and it plays into both of these guys being fairly durable, resilient, hard to shift pieces, but it does feel like you've got the shit end of the stick here because those other reactions in the other Grand Alliances are so darn good, and this one is good, but kind of underwhelming in comparison. But overall, Destruction Thralls are great. They add wounds, they do decent damage, and they are hard to shift. The issue with Destruction is that they have access to options that do what the Troggoths do and do them just as well or better, whilst also having access to some powerful utility abilities. So despite liking them and using them myself, I can see why these guys are overlooked. So that's Thralls, and overall I want to see more of these on the table. Fury, Spawn, Direwolves are all fantastic and are woefully underrepresented within the list building process, but have real tangible uses that so many lists can benefit from. But unfortunately, that is the end of this video. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments down below if you like Thralls, if you're going to use Thralls, did you forget these things even existed, and which Thrall is your favourite, and have I convinced you to try Thralls in the future? Until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra.
Groovy.
Boy howdy, it's Toast, and it's time for the post-Toast credits. A huge shout out to my algorithmic demon slayers, Andy Morris, Armour Enthusiast 7, CT6497, Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Keep Lang, Long Run Hobbies, Lord Phylax, Sable Saber, Mrs. Toast, Steve Bean, the Houston Toad, Tough Tootin' Baby, and Velas. As always, thank you so much for supporting the channel. I'll see you all next time.